In the past, the opposition has voted against the SOE extension. Are you willing to support an extension?
We supported, over the 3 years, except I think on one occasion, we supported the use of the states of emergency, although we were very uncomfortable with it. I think in light of the fact that it has proven to be ineffective, that it does not work, and that we do not think it's in Jamaica's best interest to allow the government to pursue a strategy that does not work when we need a strategy that will work, and when we do not believe that it's in the best interest of the people to allow their rights to liberty to be curtailed in a way that can affect many young people and adversely trample on their rights without compensation and affect their prospects going forward. So as far as I am concerned, I do not support this state of emergency at this time.
You talk about nexus between gangs and garrisons and politicians. How do you react to that?
There is no doubt that the history of Jamaica has seen some connection between politics and violence. As we know, the Cold War fought its way out on the periphery, which Jamaica was, with the JLP and PNP operatives on the ground being involved in political violence. Since that era of the 70s and 80s, there has been a significant change. Political violence, thank God, and I want to give credit to Most Honorable P.J. Patterson in particular for his efforts in this regard, but also supported by other leaders. Political violence is no longer a phenomenon in Jamaica to any material extent. Violence and gangs in Jamaica are funneled and financed in other ways. And I suspect that there is some residual connection in some instances between politicians and the state and organized crime, unfortunately. And that is why we established MOCA. Mr. Bunting here was the person who conceptualized and established MOCA as a fully vetted unit to deal with organized crime. And we conceptualized the Integrity Commission to bring together the other anti-corruption agencies of the state into a single entity with prosecutorial powers and strong investigative powers, including the ability to share and receive information from all the different agencies of the state, such as the tax authorities, customs, RPD, FID, etc. We have been resolute in trying to build an architecture that can deal with this matter. The government, I think, has paid lip service to it, and we are seeing the results with almost weekly scandals coming out from public boards being found by the Auditor General to be engaged in nepotism, cronyism, self-dealing, self-enrichment. These are things that we will not tolerate when we become government.
Final question. The party continues to suffer negative poll findings. As a leader, the leader is criticized of not having any traction. Is this a concern?
Well, the poll that took place a single poll has been done, and it was done in August. And I think we've learned some lessons from that poll, that we need to step up our game, be more prominent, be more active. That's why we have regular press conferences now. I'm going on the ground more and more. I'm being much more visible. Part of getting Jamaica to know me, because prior to becoming the president just a year ago of the People's National Party, I was not really somebody who was seeking the limelight. I was more a support player in the government, and in our government as a Minister of Justice, and in the opposition as spokesman on finance, but I wasn't really projecting myself in that way. That has changed. We're much more active on social media as well. So I believe the poll results will improve, and I think the party's fortunes are improving.
Mr. Golding, in your presentation earlier, you made mention of the government's failure to do any amendments to the Firearms Act. You also mentioned what the PMP would be doing should you be elected as the next government. However, I did not hear any plans to address gun control in the sense of Jamaica's borders. Do you have any comments to that?
Well, first of all, modernizing the Firearms Act to deal with things like illegal importation of firearms and distribution of firearms, that is necessary. The government is dragging its feet on it. I don't know why it's taking them so long. They promised us a new Firearms Act for years, and they haven't delivered. The issue of border control and the introduction of firearms, small arms into the country through our many coves and small sea fishing villages and other ports is a real difficult issue, and it requires multilateral and bilateral cooperation, strengthening that. We were appalled at how long, for example, it took the Jamaican government to resolve with the US government the searching of certain things coming into the country through our ports. I'm going to allow former Minister Peter Bunting, and who is our spokesman on national security, to address those issues because they really fall squarely within his portfolio. But I think in the terms of the importation of firearms and so on, legislation is one aspect of it. International cooperation is critical, and that's something I think where this government has, partly because of their patchy record in the 2010 to 2011 period with what happened then, and also because of their poor record in terms of corruption, which has been, from from Petrojam through to Nessal, through to the Universal Service Fund, to Caribbean Maritime University, to nutrition products, to AAJ. The list just goes on, and that does not instill confidence in our major partners when it comes to crime fighting. And that, I think, has weakened the effort in terms of bringing in, reducing the flow of arms into the country. But, Comrade, one thing.
The only thing I would add to that is that given the 100,000 square miles of our sovereign seas and exclusive economic zone, it is, as a practical matter, going to be impossible to intercept every vessel that could potentially be bringing firearms into Jamaica, especially when fishermen at sea do their own barter and trade. But where we would get the highest yield and the best results is investing in developing our intelligence capabilities. It is much more economically efficient, financially efficient, to invest in a network of confidential informants on every fishing beach across Jamaica, for example. It is much more effective to use intelligence to intercept the shipments coming in the coves and the beaches rather than trying to intercept them on the high seas, south of Pedro Banks or somewhere like that. So we have seen a lot of capital expenditure done, but we have not seen the results for that capital expenditure. We would have got much better results if the investment had been a much smarter investment. It could have given much better returns for smaller amounts of money.
We have a question from William Mitchell from Nationwide News. William, please unmute and go ahead.
Hi, good morning all. Well, it's a series of questions. First, two for Mr. Golding and one for Mr. Bunting. Now, Mr. Golding, you said, I got the impression that you were speaking in a personal capacity when you said, in my opinion, I will not support an extension of the state of emergency. Is that the position of the party itself?
We met last night. We had a joint meeting of the executive of the party, the executive committee, and the parliamentary group, which is comprised of our MPs and senators. And we had a long discussion on this issue there. And the overwhelming majority, not everybody, but the overwhelming majority of persons felt that we should not support the continued or the reversal of the government to going back to using the failed strategy of states of emergency as a crime-fighting tool. It does not work. It is dangerous because it violates the rights of ordinary Jamaicans without proper recourse. And so that is my view, and that is a view that is supported by the opposition.
I guess that would be the follow-up question, because I was going to ask Mr. Bunting if that's the view of the senators in the parliament to not support the extension of the state of emergency.
I have not done a formal caucus, but my sense of, given my discussions with them, is that that is also the overwhelming view of the opposition senators.
Understood. And the final question for Mr. Bunting, listening to to Mr. Golding. Sorry, the final question to Mr. Golding. Listening to the propositions put forward by you this morning, many of them, and correct me if I'm wrong, many of them sound like long-term interventions, like, the PMI investing in legislation. But many people on the ground will tell you that crime is an immediate factor. The murder rate so far this year being over 1,200 would say it is an immediate concern for many people. In the short term, in the immediate term, what are some of the things that the PNP would suggest the government do instead of a state of emergency in the immediate term?
Well, some of the methods that we were suggesting are short-term methods. So, for example, the police engaging with community leaders in volatile areas through a method which shows the urgency of how they see the situation and provides a method or cooperative approach to trying to reduce the continued resort to violence can be effective in the short term. And I've seen it work in my own constituency. It has worked elsewhere in Augustown and so on. This is one of the methods, I think, which the PMI ought to be supporting, and the PMI should be adequately funded to do that work as well. And the state needs to get behind these initiatives so that they have some sustained improvements and not just short-term improvements. But the bigger point is the fact that everything that is being done to improve security by putting soldiers on the ground with police does not require a state of emergency for that to be done. You can deploy the military in support of the police in communities where there's an upsurge of violence, and it is done from time to time all across the country. And if you want to do it in a more sustained way, you can. What the state of emergency allows is detention without charge, sometimes for the whole duration of the state of emergency, sometimes for up to 90 days if the police are so minded. That can be for something like a curfew violation, being outdoors on the road, outside the yard, after whatever time the curfew starts. You could end up in jail with no recourse to the courts for that, or for saying something that a policeman regards as abusive language. The potential for abuse is huge, and the history shows that thousands and thousands, I'm not talking about hundreds, thousands, several thousand young Jamaican men, largely men, not exclusively men, were detained in the period from 2017 to 2020, those 3 years, for extended periods, and were never charged. There was no justification provided for their detention. It upset their lives. It must have traumatized them to have been held without cause for that long. Their jobs, many of them who were working, lost their jobs, and they have been paid no compensation for that. I do not believe that that is in the best interest of Jamaica, for the state to be treating our young people like that. And so that is why we do not feel that the state of emergency is a solution. But we are very much in favor of other strategies that would provide additional security on the ground, deploying the full weight of the JDF in support of the police, and indeed, in appropriate cases, zones of special operations, which we have supported. That legislation was introduced by this government. We did some good work in improving it, but when it passed through Parliament, to ensure that it was more balanced and more constitutionally correct. And it has been used, but it has only been used in a very small and insignificant way. And we have never had a proper explanation as to why it has not become a national strategy. All of the areas that are within this state of emergency could be within a zone of special operation if the government had the will to do it. It may be more expensive in terms of social investment, but you can phase those according to your budget. But the point is that the imposition of large numbers of police and soldiers with a legislative framework that supports that exists without the need to go to a state of emergency.
That's it for questions. Thank you to the men and women of the media for joining us this morning. Have a good day.